Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're seeing us today. It is a pleasure to have you in the Global Summit on Tech Facilitated Based Gender-Based Violence. I am Pamela Zavala, and I'm the Global CEO of the No More Foundation. And today I'm really excited to have Dr. Tasha Menaker from Match Group and Ebony Tucker from Uber talking about issues around privacy versus protection, trying to kind of navigate safety, rights, and responsibility on digital platforms in general. But before we kind of, get into it, I just want to make sure that we have some general housekeeping. If there's any issues on the session, we encourage you to um, take any steps to make sure you prioritize your own safety, you stop the session, and you can reach out for support. In the link below, you'll find our global directory that has specialized domestic and sexual violence support. And as I said before, we will be exploring how widely companies as Match Group and Uber are navigating trying to honor survivor privacy rights whilst maintaining compliance with increasing regulation and data requests from law enforcement. So to start the conversation, I would love to know where does the tension between user privacy and user safety more clearly is kind of outlined in your work, and how has this evolved with all the increasing regulation? Ebony, if you want to start,
Yeah.
then that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think a couple of things about this. One, I don't think there's quite as much of a tension there as we often think there is. So I'd love to explain that a little bit further. But also to say just initially, I don't think that the regulation or a new regulation has necessarily changed the way that we look at reporting, for instance. So Uber has reported incidents of sexual assault and misconduct, as well as other safety incidents on app since 2019, going back to reports of incidents in 2017 and 2018. When we submit these reports or publish these reports, rather, we usually do that thinking about safety incidents from the past couple of years and wanting to be very transparent and let people know what's happening there. I think when it comes to giving individual case information, there is a tension or there is tension there because I don't think people often understand when requesting this information how survivor autonomy and not giving survivors choice about where their information goes, how that can be harmful, not just to those survivors, but can also create a chilling effect on reporting, which is exactly what we don't want to
Mm-hmm.
have happen, right? So people who might have incidents in the future will be able to see that previous survivors didn't have control over where the information went. For us as a company, we work really hard to make sure reporting is easy because we want to know. We want to know not just about more significant sexual assault and sexual misconduct incidents, but also just if people were uncomfortable in cars, if inappropriate things were said. And so when we open up all of these avenues to reporting, we want to get back as much information as possible, but when we're not protecting survivor information, that can create a chilling effect that just keeps us from getting what we need to know. So I think in order to make sure we're getting this information so that we can make the app as and the rides as safe as possible, protecting survivor information is a huge part of making sure that the other thing happens.
What's your take on this, Tasha?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. So, just for a little bit of context, Match Group is the parent company for over 15 dating services worldwide, and that includes Tinder and Hinge. So, one of the places where this tension is most salient for us is around authenticity checks. So, ensuring that the person who has a profile is actually a real person and that they are who they say they are. And I think for years, a lot of the conversation around authenticity has focused on how can we use credentials to verify somebody's identity. Things like typing in your birthday to determine someone's age, or now we see a lot of sites requesting government IDs to do so. But I think we all know, and especially as advocates, there are a lot of workarounds to these types of verification. And when it comes to verifying identity, naturally, the more information we have about a person, the better able we are to determine that they are real and that they are who they say they are. And so that's where that tension, I think, comes in between privacy and safety. And so, for example, on Tinder and Hinge, we've introduced recently a tool called Face Check that's meant to address some of these inauthentic accounts. And what it does is it asks users to complete a live video selfie that captures biometric information and helps to confirm that a real human is present and that they are consistent with the profile photos on their account. And I think tools like this are reflecting kind of a broader shift that's happening across the industry. I think the question is becoming more so what is the minimum amount of information that we need from a person to address a very specific safety concern? And at the same time, I do think regulation has made some of this tension between safety and privacy a little bit more visible. So privacy frameworks like GDPR rightly push companies towards data minimization. At the same time, we're seeing online safety laws increasingly expect platforms to be more proactively detect harmful behavior, prevent repeat offenders, intervene earlier when in a situation where harm may occur. And in order to do that, platforms inherently have to retain signals and patterns, be able to detect those patterns over time. So I think these obligations can pull in opposite directions a little bit. So at Match Group for us right now, the focus is on building tools that are proportionate. So the question really is making sure they're effective enough to protect users and support accountability when harm occurs, but also making sure we respect users' privacy and autonomy. And that's a tough balance sometimes because these things evolve quickly. Technology is changing very quickly, and the regulation is changing quickly as well.
Yeah, and I think there's like I think there's a disconnect also of information sometimes when you're making the safety kind of requests, what, some of the privacy bits that you might actually be losing with it as a user. Um, Ebony, can you share an example of when Uber was asked to disclose user data, whether be it through law enforcement requests or a regulatory requirement? And how have you been able to navigate survivor safety in this type of situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because I think that especially when it comes to law enforcement reporting, I mean, in all areas, I think we get requests for information, but particularly in law enforcement reporting, because that's our more constant area of requests. And so the way that we handle it in order to balance survivor privacy while also being compliant with law enforcement and really giving them what they need to appropriately investigate cases is that we do compile the information, get it ready for them. And when survivors make reports to us, we provide them with a case ID. So when they are ready to report to law enforcement, if they make the decision that that's what they want to do, then they share that information with law enforcement, and investigators can come back to us and receive all information related to the case through a portal. So we have a team that works directly with law enforcement to make sure that they get that information. We just wait for the survivors to give us permission first. I also think that one way that we really want to be supportive of survivors throughout this process is to make sure that when they are making decisions, that they are informed and that they of their rights and that they've had a trauma-informed response. So we do manage the National Sexual Assault. We do manage with the National Sexual Assault Hotline, a hotline specifically for survivors making reports into Uber. And then that way they can have conversations with an advocate as they're trying to make the decisions about how to manage any future reporting that they would like to do.
I think that those partnerships with sector specialist providers make all the difference, right? Because it really kind of guarantees that survivors will get the treatment that they would get, outside by
Exactly.
reporting to the.
Yeah, and if I could add, a lot of these processes, as someone who used to be on Uber Safety Advisory Board many years ago, a lot of these processes, as they were started, really do depend on these partnerships to help us figure out the best and most responsible way to respond in these situations. So, from Reliance to No More, to so many of our advocate partners, that's how these systems were created.
Hmm. And I know, Tasha, I know there's growing pressure on companies to share more information up front, whether through be it shorter data retention windows, that scares me a lot actually, regulatory demands, or just like law enforcement requests. How are you guys kind of navigating that pressure, both at a policy level, because there's a lot of a push as we can see it from the kind of the sector partnerships actually, and individual cases whilst you protect survivors.
Yeah, it's a great question because we are truly navigating a real structural tension here. Law enforcement and victim advocates and our NGO partners are often asking and advising us to actually retain more data for longer periods because that information at the end of the day is evidence. And advocates know it can take months or even years before a survivor is ready to seek support or to make a report, whether it's to the platform or to law enforcement. At the same time, privacy laws and some legislation, as you said, Pamela, is pushing companies in the opposite direction to collect less data and to delete it faster. One of the things we've seen recently is actually a bill that's currently under review in New York that would require online dating services specifically to delete user data 30 days after an account is closed. The original language of the bill required immediate deletion. And so I completely believe the intention behind this bill is well-meaning and intended to protect privacy. But in our context, that can create significant safety risks because, as you can imagine, it's very common for both perpetrators and survivors on our platforms to delete their accounts immediately after a harm occurs. And so if the data disappears too soon, we lose the information that we need to take action. So the question ultimately can't simply be keep or delete. We really need to parse this and ask many questions. You know, what type of data do we retain? In what form do we keep it? For how long? Who is allowed to access it? And what are the specific safety purposes for keeping that data and for the criteria that we set in terms of who can see it? And so, in line with this at Match Group, we do try to take a tiered approach to this. So general user data is governed by minimization principles. But if we're talking about safety relevant information, so reports of harm, enforcement history patterns that can indicate repeat instances of harm or abuse, we may need to retain those data longer with strict access controls because that's what allows us to recognize when someone banned on one platform is trying to reappear on another platform or even back onto the same platform. So the goal is to ultimately preserve what's necessary to act on the harm, but limit access and disclosure to what is truly justified and truly needed. And at the end of the day, we strongly believe that a survivor's report should not automatically become something that's just handed over to anyone. We treat it first as a signal that internals a safety review internally on our side, and any external sharing of information is carefully gated. So we're looking for a valid legal process, we're looking at proportionality, and we have to have a very clear safety or legal purpose for sharing any kind of user data.
I remember clearly when we were having conversations around this bill precisely, where information is deleted, or asking to be deleted almost immediately, not giving survivors any chance to think, make a case, or giving the opportunity to perpetrators to immediately delete their accounts, knowing that there will be no trace of what's happened. And sometimes we think this, yes, as you said, it could be well intentioned, but not thought through, and maybe not even discussed with survivor organizations who usually have other views when it comes to this matter. So, no, thank you for that. We see that tension here between wanting more privacy, and we live in a world where I think we feel our privacy is so infringed.
Mhm.
But at the same time, right, what does that mean for users and safety? In the same line, Ebony, I know from the Uber side being asked to share survivors' information from reports, and how is that coming across?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of the same ways as Tasha described, I think we're seeing a lot of similar issues where I think that request legislation, a lot of those things are obviously very well intentioned. But the communication, I think with obviously advocacy organizations, but also with companies about why we're making the decisions that we are, I think would be really, really helpful. So obviously protecting user privacy as well as survivor autonomy over their own information is a top priority. But I think for us, it would be really great when we're getting these requests for PII, when we're being asked for more of that upfront, to be able to have the conversation about what it is that they're actually trying to get to, when it comes to safety. And I think this is something that I sort of alluded to early on, is that we're seeing a lot of tension when really we're all trying to get to the same goal, just considering different factors. So I
Mm.
really would love to be able to have like more of that open conversation, and for advocates to be able to have more of that open conversation with regulators to make sure that what we're getting to the safety metric, the goal, how we're measuring safety and the goal that we're trying to get there is actually something that requires PII, which usually it doesn't. So one of the things that we do on our end, obviously, is respecting reporting, and making sure that we're creating the best processes and the most confidential whenever we can. But then also looking at other ways where, when on the driver's side, so when drivers are deactivated for sexual assault or sexual misconduct, that we can share that information with other companies to make sure that they're not hopping from one place to another to commit the same actions. So when we know that someone has a prevalence for harm or a likelihood that they're going to commit harm, we want to make sure that we can keep as many people safe as possible. So we worked with Lyft to create the industry safety sharing program where we do share information about those drivers. I think those are, which I think is very similar to some of the programs that Tasha talked about. I think those are ways that we can actually look at prevention of incidents on app that don't require the sharing of PII, that has an impact in ways that we're not actually thinking through and can be really negatively impactful for future reporters.
And based on that, I think I'm gonna throw you like a hard ball here, Tasha. Really, really, because survivor privacy in a way sits in tension sometimes with other, types of right, as Ebony was putting, uh, due process, worker protections, um, consumer rights. So how does Match Group go around trying to balance, all of those other kind of demands into this equation, including appeals?
This is a tough balance to strike, and I'll admit it's something we're continuously evaluating and refining because I'm not quite sure there's a perfect process here. It's important that people, of course, understand the rules that govern our platforms and that they have a meaningful opportunity to appeal enforcement decisions. I think we can all agree that fairness and consistency and accountability matter. And the reality is, false reports can occur. And we have seen on our platforms that sometimes false reporting is used to is weaponized against people who are vulnerable. We've seen it weaponized against survivors, where former partners are making false reports to try and get them banned and off of our platform so that they cannot pursue a new relationship. We've seen it weaponized against transgender users, for example. So it is important that our processes are robust and that serious enforcement decisions, especially ones that could lead to someone being removed from the platform, are subject to review. And at the same time, as you point out, Pamela, we do have a responsibility to protect survivor and reporters' privacy and safety in that process. So we have to be really intentional about how these processes are designed. In practice, we focus our appeals on the enforcement decision itself. So when we're evaluating a decision, we're looking to see did the conduct actually violate our policies and was the policy applied correctly? We do not disclose the underlying report or share sensitive evidence or provide any details with the person who is accused that could identify who made the report. This is especially true in cases that involve offline harm. We really want to be careful not to reveal information that could expose the person who reported and create any type of risk for retaliation. And so at the end of the day, I think the key principle for us is that recognizing that due process does not have to mean that we disclose survivor information. You can provide notice of the policy that's violated. We can explain the basis for an enforcement action and offer a meaningful avenue for review, um, while still protecting and preserving the privacy and the safety of the person who reported harm. And that's our ultimate priority.
To all of those that work in this sector, we know that sometimes some of the problems that we confront just don't have a right answer or a straightforward or a super clear answer for people who are maybe moderating, sitting down and making decisions. What principle kind of guides both Match and Uber when there's not a right or just a clear action? How do you go about that? Ebony.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is where the safety by design really comes in, as we're sort of always trying to make the app something that is more easily usable, more user friendly, really thinking through what is it that we're building in for safety. I think focusing on women's safety as someone who's in my role, every single thing that we're putting on the app coming through women's safety and having that conversation is really how we keep, I think, a strong focus on what it is that we're actually trying to do. So, doing that, working with partners, we've been able to develop things like things that we hope people are using, like PIN verification. So, not only do
Mhm.
you know you're getting in the right car, but you know that your driver is an Uber driver, which is really important. Ride checks. So you can share your ride with trusted contacts that you are able to keep in the app. We check up on people as they're driving if you're stopped too long or you're veering off course. All of those tools have been developed with the purpose of making sure that prevention of incidents is where our number one goal should always stay. We also allow you to record your ride, audio record. We make sure that people are not using their real phone numbers when they're interacting with drivers during and before rides. After a ride, you're not able to contact a person anymore with the temporary phone number that we give you for before and during. Those things are really, really important. And I think when the goal is always prevention, we see one incident as one too many, then you're always going to end up in a place where you're prioritizing safety and looking out for survivors and hoping to prevent incidents so that you don't have as many survivors who are having to come back and report.
What about Match, Tasha?
Yeah, I love this question of kind of what do we do when there is no clear right answer? Because in my context specifically, I think it's especially interesting. Dating platforms are uniquely complex, I think, because we sit at the intersection of safety and privacy and intimacy. So people are typically coming to our products to form romantic connections, sometimes sexual connections, which means they are often making themselves vulnerable in very real ways. And I think what makes trust and safety especially challenging in this space is so much of that experience is truly subjective. What feels comfortable and flirty and appropriate to one person can feel very different for another. And then you bring in different cultures and identities and experiences. There often isn't a single right answer. More often, there are going to be competing values that we're going to have to balance in kind of making these decisions. And I completely agree with what Ebony said. At Match Group, we use four pillars of trust and safety to guide these types of decisions. Safety by design is one of them, user control, authenticity and trust, and then inclusion. We really believe that users should have control over their information, what they're sharing with other people, who can see them on our apps, who can contact them, and how they show up and present themselves on the platform. That's foundational to safety. And I think for many users, especially survivors, privacy is what allows them to participate safely in the first place. So at the same time, though, there are cases where improving safety does require asking users for more information. And FaceCheck is a good example of that, like I mentioned earlier, where we're asking users to share biometric data in order to verify that they are who they say they are. That's a meaningful privacy ask. But there's also a clear and concrete safety benefit, which is reducing deepfakes and impersonation, decreasing scams, reducing deceptive behavior and people who are banned, getting back on the platforms again. And ultimately, it gives users greater confidence that the person that they're going to meet offline is actually a genuine person. So for us, in these kind of gray areas, the question we always come back to is there a demonstrated safety benefit that justifies this level of data collection? Are we being transparent with users about what we're collecting, why we're doing it, and how we're using it? And if the answer to all of those questions is yes, that's generally how we evaluate whether we're going to move forward with an action or a new tool or feature. And when there isn't a perfect answer, we intentionally bias toward protecting the more vulnerable person in the equation. And exactly as Evany said, I think this is really what safety by design means in practice. We use this term a lot, but in reality, it means designing products with the needs of the most vulnerable users in mind from the very beginning. And so we ask questions in this process like, does this feature give users more control over their experience or less? Is it enabling them to set boundaries easily? Can they leave this interaction safely? Can they seek help quickly if something goes wrong? These are kind of the framings that we set into place as we're kind of making these evaluations, both with our internal teams and with external partners, because we have to have those diverse perspectives in the room when these difficult trade-offs are being
Mhm.
made, because that's what surfaces these different risks and blind spots for us. So ultimately, I'd say, we try to stay survivor-centered in how we're evaluating the outcomes of what we design. And we have to ask whether our policies and our products are actually working for people who have experienced harm. Are they meaningfully helping them to feel safer, more empowered, and more control over their experience?
And ladies, to finish, we like to end every session at the summit with a bit of a action or future, or what could the future look like, right? Like, what would you like to see really across industry that would protect survivors? Ebony,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you had one wish to be
One
met,
big thing.
what would that
One
be?
wish. I mean,
One
can I give
wish.
you two? I'll make one
Yeah,
of them
please.
really small, I
No, no,
promise.
you
I
can give
mean,
me two for sure.
I think, yeah, two very quick ones. One is I'm going to make a plug for transparency reporting because I do think it's so important, and I really would love to see that more industry wide. I also think it gives companies a really good opportunity not just to talk about what the safety incidents are, but put them into explain them and also to talk about what they're actually doing to prevent. I think that does create a healthy amount of accountability there and a good opportunity for companies to talk about what's actually happening internally to prevent safety incidents. I also think, too, which is, the big one, and I think starting the beginning of that is happening now, with Tasha and I both being on this call and or this session and having this relationship with No More. That is how we know each other and being able to work together in a way that's broader across the industry. Hearing about the differences because dating apps and rideshare is not the same thing, but there's so much that we have in common and so much that we can learn from each other. So I think seeing companies come together and really talk about what they're doing, what it is that they're struggling with, and what they could use help with, I think those are the things, if we can do that on a much wider scale, that to me feels like just great building of an agenda really towards protection of survivors.
Thank you for that. That's, transparency for us, something that we have also been pushing from the No More side, and we love to see the reports. And I think really, if we could see it more widespread, would be seeing like more real changes in platforms, because I think it does that, right? It makes people more accountable, but also lets people know some of the problems that are being confronted. So, and bringing companies together to discuss, as you know, is one of the reasons why both of you support our corporate network. Just bringing places where people can talk and discuss more about these internal problems really, causes synergy. Tasha, what about you? What about your dreams across sector?
Yeah, I love Ebony's response and what you added there, Pamela. I honestly I couldn't agree more, and it's really in line with my response as well. I think one of the biggest needs right now is a more nuanced conversation about this landscape and what different safety tools actually do and what are the potential benefits and consequences. And that's going to come from breaking down silos between sectors and developing a more common language. As someone who's gone from different sectors myself, I feel like I've had to learn a new language every time I entered a new one. And that I think can create challenges for us as we're trying to create solutions together. And so, an example of this, I think, is the discussions to this point around biometrics and identity verification. If we're thinking about this from that kind of safety privacy perspective, most of those conversations are treating all forms of biometric processing as though they're the same thing. And there's a difference between a liveness check and photo verification, which are addressing these narrow safety concerns and broad facial recognition systems that are tied to, big identity databases. And these distinctions matter, and it's important that we're coming together to parse that across different areas of expertise. Because when we collapse everything into a single category, we can't have those thoughtful conversations about balancing privacy and safety and actually prioritizing what's going to prevent harm. I think one other issue I'm seeing that I would love to kind of see evolve in the future is that the legal landscape is increasingly fragmented across different countries and even states. And we have to remember platforms like Match Group and Uber were operating across, over 100 countries. And so, echoing Ebony exactly, I think we really need to have stronger collaboration between platforms and policymakers and privacy experts, researchers, survivors, advocates, bringing everyone together so we can have more consistency globally when it comes to these standards and regulations and ensuring that they truly are grounded in real world, survivor experiences and those evidence-based best practices.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you so much. Sorry, Ebony, you want
No,
to add
just couldn't
something?
agree more.
Yeah.
Just adding my plus one.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being here. Just both of you being here, talking to people. People can hearing your point of view, and sharing with us what they are thinking also, I think is really important. It's the start of a conversation. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have had you both here today. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.